What if I told you that not every Israelite was considered a Jew, and not every Jew can actually claim descent from all the tribes of Israel? It's a complex story, one that's left countless people scratching their heads. So, are Israelites and Jews the same? Is Israel just a land, or is it a people, or maybe both? This is a question that comes up so often in the comments, and today we're going to break it down in a way that finally makes sense. Because once you grasp the real history behind these names, Jews, Israelites, and Israel, you'll see how they were each woven into a bigger tapestry of God's promises. So stick around till the end, because this isn't just about labels. It's about how God's covenant stretches across thousands of years, holding together people, land, and faith. Ready to explore? Let's dive in. Where it all began to truly understand these identities, we have to go all the way back to the dusty roads of Mesopotamia, to a man named Abraham. God called Abraham out of his homeland in Ur, asking him to journey to a new place with a promise. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars. That promise, that covenant, would pass to his son Isaac and then to Isaac's son Jacob. Jacob is key here, because after an intense night wrestling with an angel, God gave him a brand new name, Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. His 12 sons each became the head of a tribe, together known as the 12 tribes of Israel. From that moment, Jacob's family line wasn't just any family, it became a nation. Who were the Israelites? At this stage of history, everyone descended from Jacob was called an Israelite. It didn't matter if they were from Judah, Benjamin, Levi, or any of the other tribes. They were all Israelites, children of Israel, tied together by blood and by God's promise. But notice, after Solomon's reign, around 930 BC, things fall apart. The term Jew didn't even exist yet. The people were simply known as Israelites, marked by their shared descent from Jacob and their identity as God's chosen people. Their entire sense of belonging was tribal. Each tribe camped together, marched together, and inherited its own portion of the promised land. They weren't just Israelites, they were people of Judah. So where did Judah come from? Fast forward a few hundred years. Israel becomes a united kingdom under kings like Saul, David, and Solomon. The kingdom splits in two. The northern kingdom, still called Israel, made up of 10 tribes. The southern kingdom, called Judah, made up of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, with Jerusalem as its capital. Because of this split, people in Judah started to see themselves differently, and it's from this tribe and territory that we get the word Jew. The 10 tribes were scattered across the empire, eventually becoming what history calls the lost tribes of Israel. Originally, it literally meant someone from Judah, but over time, it grew to mean more. Someone who worshipped in Jerusalem, someone who kept the laws of Moses, someone faithful to the God of Israel. The lost tribes and the lasting Jews. Then came catastrophe in 720 BC. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. Meanwhile, the southern kingdom of Judah survived at least for a while longer. People from Judah, now increasingly called Jews, continued to live in their land, worship at the temple, and keep the covenant traditions. So here's the first big key. All Jews were Israelites. But after the northern tribes disappeared, not all Israelites were Jews. Exile in Babylon, a new identity emerges. The Jews in Babylon developed a faith that could survive anywhere. But Judah wouldn't escape judgment forever. In 586 BC, Babylonian King Nebuchadnezzar invaded, destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, and carried off many people to Babylon. Being Jewish started to mean more than where you lived or which tribe you came from. You think this would break their spirit completely, but instead, something remarkable happened. In exile, the people of Judah, now solidly known as Jews, found ways to keep their faith alive without a temple or even their homeland. They gathered in synagogues to study the Torah. They raised up rabbis as new kinds of leaders. They doubled down on keeping the Sabbath, dietary laws, and circumcision. Unlike their Israelite ancestors, who tied identity to land and temple rituals, they became a people whose covenant was portable, written not just on stone or tied to a city, but on their hearts and in their practices. This was more than just survival. It was a transformation. It meant holding tight to God's covenant no matter what foreign land you were in. The return and the roots of modern Judaism, it meant someone who still lived by the covenant, someone who remembered. About 70 years later, when Persia conquered Babylon, King Cyrus allowed the Jews to go back home. Many returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, but many other stayed scattered across the Persian Empire, creating early Jewish communities in places like Babylon, Susa, and beyond. This makes some returning. Some stay and help turn being a Jew into something deeper than just nationality. It became about shared faith, traditions, and covenant loyalty wherever you lived. That's why, even today, Jewish identity isn't only about bloodlines or tribal ancestry. It's about carrying forward a unique relationship with God that survived exile, loss, and centuries of wandering. By the time of the Second Temple, the word Jew meant far more than someone from Judah, and that memory would carry them through even darker days ahead. Alright, so we've traced how the identity of Jew evolved out of Israelite, especially after the Assyrian conquest scattered the northern tribes, and Babylon carried away the people of Judah. But history didn't freeze there. The Jewish story kept moving through new empires, fresh exiles, and surprising revivals. And each chapter laid a new meaning onto what it meant to be a Jew, and what it meant to belong to Israel. Under Persia and Greece, faith without borders. When King Cyrus of Persia let the Jews return to Jerusalem, not all chose to go. Many had already built lives in Babylon and across the Persian Empire. So you ended up with two kinds of Jewish experience. One, those who went back to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Two, those who stayed scattered, keeping Jewish faith alive in foreign lands. This was actually the start of what we call the Jewish diaspora, a global community living outside the Promised Land but still deeply tied to it through prayer, customs, and yearly pilgrimages. Then came the Greeks, under Alexander the Great. Greek language and culture swept through the Middle East. Some Jews embraced parts of Hellenistic culture, others resisted fiercely. This tension exploded during the rule of Antiochus IV, who tried to outlaw Jewish practices, leading to the famous Maccabean revolt and the miracle of Hanukkah. Through all this, one thing stayed clear. Whether in Persia, Greece, or later Rome, Jews kept circling back to the covenant. Being Jewish meant keeping Sabbath, circumcision, dietary laws, markers of identity that no foreign king could erase. The Second Temple and Roman rule. By the time the Romans took over Judea, the Jewish world was both unified and diverse. In Jerusalem, the rebuilt temple stood as the center of worship and sacrifice. Across the empire, Jewish communities built synagogues, studied Torah, and sent gifts back to support the temple. But both would turn toward Jerusalem in prayer, celebrate Passover, and teach their children the Shema. A Jew in Alexandria might speak Greek. A Jew in Babylon might speak Aramaic. Even in exile, they carried Zion in their hearts. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So even as Jewish life spread across the world, it stayed spiritually tethered to the land of Israel. This is one of the most powerful things about Jewish identity that's rooted in a place, yet portable. The Second Temple, the very heart of Jewish worship, was burned to the ground. The Roman destruction and the next diaspora, but instead, it was another transformation. Then came another catastrophe. In 70 AD, Roman legions under Titus destroyed Jerusalem after a brutal siege. This was more than just a building. It was the place God's name dwelt. Thousands were killed, and many survivors were sold into slavery or scattered deeper into the Roman Empire. This could have been the end of the Jewish story. Without a temple, the synagogue became even more central. Rabbinic leadership and oral law, which would become the Talmud, grew in importance. Festivals like Passover and Yom Kippur became portable ways to keep Jewish time, even far from Jerusalem. So in scripture and prophecy, Jews are still often called Israel, or the children of Israel. So ironically, the loss of the temple solidified Judaism as a faith able to survive anywhere from Roman Italy to the sands of Arabia. Are Jews still Israelites? Here's where many people get tripped up ethnically. Jews are descendants of the Israelites primarily from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, because the other tribes were largely lost to history. Spiritually, they carry forward the same covenant God made with Israel. When the Bible talks about Israel's restoration, or Israel's failures, or God's promises to Israel, those words are deeply connected to the Jewish people, because they're the remnant of the original 12 tribes and make them one nation. So yes, Jews are Israelites, but more precisely, they're the surviving branch of the Israelites' descendants mainly from Judah, Benjamin. Many Jewish prayers even include lines asking God to restore all the scattered tribes and Levi, who kept the identity alive when the other tribes vanished into the nations, the lost tribes and prophetic hope. But what about the other tribes, the so-called 10 lost tribes of Israel? When Assyria scattered them, they didn't completely vanish biologically, they were absorbed into other nations, but their tribal identity dissolved. That's why in prophecy, there are promises that one day God will gather all of Israel, not just Judah, but also Ephraim and Manasseh, and the rest back into one people. I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and will gather them on every side. Ezekiel 37:21-20. This is a hope that still lives today. So while modern Jews come primarily from Judah's line, the covenant promise still hovers over all Israel, waiting for a future day of reunion, scattered, yet bound together. It was memory, law, hope, and a stubborn trust that God wasn't finished with them yet. From Babylon to Rome, Spain to Poland, Yemen to New York, Jews stayed connected by shared scriptures. The Torah and prophets shared rituals like Sabbath, and circumcision shared longing for Jerusalem. So even when nations tried to wipe them out, whether through forced conversions, expulsions, or genocide, the core identity held. Being Jewish meant being part of a story older than Rome, older than Greece, older than most of the world's current nations. It's a story that survived because it was more than bloodlines. Alright, so far we've followed this incredible thread of identity from Abraham to Jacob, from the tribes of Israel to the people of Judah, through exile and diaspora. But the story of who is a Jew, who is an Israelite, and what Israel even means didn't end in the ancient world. In many ways, it only got more complicated and more miraculous. Through medieval Europe, a people apart, as centuries passed, Jewish communities spread across the world. In Spain and Portugal, Jews became influential scholars, doctors, and financiers until the Inquisition drove them out. In Central and Eastern Europe, large communities grew under shifting kingdoms, forming the roots of Ashkenazi culture. In North Africa and the Middle East, Jews under Islamic rule formed vibrant Sephardi and Mizrahi traditions. Wherever they went, Jews often lived as distinct minorities, marked by customs that set them apart: Sabbath, dietary laws, circumcision, Hebrew prayers. They were sometimes tolerated, often restricted, and frequently persecuted. But through it all, they held on to the things that made them Israel. They still read the Torah. They still face Jerusalem in prayer. They still call themselves the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So even though the original tribal structures were long gone, the identity as the people of Israel survived through practice, memory, and hope. The Holocaust, the world's attempt to erase Israel. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we reach one of the darkest chapters of the Holocaust. Nazi ideology didn't just see Jews as a religious community. It painted them as an eternal ethnic threat, a living remnant of biblical Israel that had to be exterminated. 6 million Jews were murdered. Entire communities that had preserved traditions for 1,000 years vanished overnight. And yet after all of this, Jewish identity didn't disappear. In fact, the horror of the Holocaust led directly to one of the most astonishing turns in modern history: the modern state of Israel, from covenant to country in 1948, after millennia of exile, persecution, and wandering. The Jewish people re-established a sovereign homeland in the very land where Abraham had walked and David had ruled. For the first time in over 2,000 years, there was a Jewish state called Israel. This is why today, when people hear the word Israel, they might think first of a country, But that country is named for the ancient covenant family Jacob, who was renamed Israel. So in a stunning way, history came full circle. The people of Israel, long scattered, rebuilt the land of Israel. Jews, once just a surviving branch of the Israelites, now again carried the full name of Israel in both spiritual and national sense. It's almost impossible to overstate how unlikely this was. No other ancient people exiled for 2,000 years came back to reclaim the original language, customs, and land. It's as if time bent around a promise. So, are Jews Israelites today? Here's how to finally put it all together. Jews today are descendants of the Israelites, mainly from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. The term Jew originally meant someone from Judah, but over time it became the global name for all those who kept the covenant of Moses, wherever they lived. Spiritually, Jews see themselves and are seen in the Bible as Israel, carrying forward the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So when prophets speak of Israel's restoration, or God calls Israel his firstborn son, it's still speaking to the covenant people whose thread never broke even if only a remnant survived. Why this still matters? Understanding this isn't just about trivia. It's about seeing how a single family line from ancient Mesopotamia became nations, scattered across continents yet still bound together by shared memory or a sign of divine faithfulness. How the survival of Jewish identity across 3,000 years, despite everything from Assyria to Auschwitz, is either the greatest human story of resilience. How modern debates over Israel's politics, over Jewish rights and safety are all tangled up in a much older story that began with God's covenant to Abraham. When you meet a Jewish person today, you're meeting someone whose identity survived Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, Antiochus, Titus, the Inquisition, Hitler. That is extraordinary, whether you see it as a miracle or simply as relentless human will. It's one of the most powerful narratives on earth. Looking forward, the prophetic mystery of the Bible speaks of a time when all of Israel, not just the Jews, but the lost tribes too, will be gathered together again. The prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea all paint pictures of this future reunification. Even the New Testament echoes this hope. So in a way, the Jewish people today are like the beating heart of an ancient promise still waiting for its final chapters.